Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. I'm here with my newer friend, Tim Chapman, who I found online or Facebook or somehow because I wanted to get my certification as a range safety officer, which means I can take newbies out to the range and teach them safely how to shoot a gun without blowing their foot off, and found Tim. Turns out Tim has a similar story as me, just signed up for the military, I think right out of high school or college. We'll get to that. Is in the Air Force, has about 1 year left on his contract before he's a free man. E7 right now, serving at the Air Force Base out here in Nevada. And this is the best, Chief Inspector. 5th generation integrated avionics, which probably means you do some secret squirrel shit that we can't talk about, but we'll get some idea about what you do. As we sat through the one-day course, kind of going through the NRA instruction, which we'll talk about the NRA, some stuff I love about them, some stuff I don't love about them. But I do think they have some of the best training for, safety procedures for people that want to handle firearms. Turns out we both are into Jiu Jitsu. We both got a strong daughter that we want to raise into maybe more of a tomboy than she would like. I don't know. I know your daughter shoots. My daughter does Jiu Jitsu. So yeah, welcome on the podcast, man. Thanks so much for being in.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
All right, let's get that mic up in your face. You got to have it like right in your mouth, or it just doesn't come through.
Thanks for having me, man. These podcasts are a ton of fun.
Yeah. So tell us the origin story. Like, you got a little bit of that Southern draw. You must be from somewhere in the South. Where'd you grow up, and then how'd you get in the Air Force?
Born and raised Nashville, Tennessee.
Before Nashville was cool, huh? Like
yeah. Now it's like super cool for celebrities and all kinds of folks to move to. I was just back home this last summer, and it is not the same place I left.
Yeah.
So, long story short, September 11th happened. I'd had a good career and was fairly successful, I guess, at the time, at least financially. And September 11th happened, and it gave me a new perspective where it was, there's more to life. I need to do something that's bigger than me, something besides just cashing a paycheck and having fun all the time.
Yeah.
And I went and talked to a Marine recruiter.
So you were already, were you out of high school, out of college, and the workforce?
I was out of high school with a little bit of college under my belt, but the career was actually doing well. The paycheck was well, and it's like, who really needs college?
Right. No, same way. Yeah. Started doing mortgages and was like, oh, wait, I can make this kind of money without going to UCLA? That sounds awesome. So this is interesting because so many people in the military, they sign up right out of high school, right? They don't know what they want to do. But you actually were already kind of into life, doing life, and then had this calling because of 9/11.
Yes. And sometimes I say I was lucky. Family friend that we went to church with told me, he said, look, you don't want to join the Marines. They're like, just trust me. And of course I did trust Jim, and he was a retired senior master sergeant, E8, out of the Air Force himself. And he was like, look, let me just trust me to guide you on this, and we'll get you something you really like. And if you don't like being in the military doing it, there's a great career field outside the military doing the same thing. I was like, all right, Jim, I trust you.
Yeah. That's the problem with going in. Like I was an 11 Charlie, a mortarman, infantry guy. Luckily got out before September 11th, or unluckily. I never know how to think about that. Anyway, you get out of the military as like a grunt, the Marine, Army dude. There's not a whole lot of relevant job opportunity in the civilian force. So when you went in, what did you decide you wanted to do, and what did you think that might translate to after you got out into the civilian world? Like what can you think back 20 years? What was the mindset?
Yeah, it was initially what Jim was retired out as was avionics technician on C-130s. I didn't know a thing about aircraft. And I was like, and he explained to me that how, avionics systems, you're working on the computer systems that control everything else on the aircraft. So I was like, okay, well that, computers, technology, future growth, there's a chance that if I don't like being in the military, then there's some growth here. And I got to MEPS, and we got to looking at jobs. I was sitting there with my recruiter, and I noticed F-16s, and fighter aircraft just seems so much more sexy.
Yes.
And they're louder, they're faster, way cooler. And I was like, you know what? That one looks like it's way complicated to learn, so let me do that.
That's awesome. And, it's interesting because we interviewed my buddy James Lomax, who was a Top Gun pilot, legit in the cockpit going a million miles an hour. And he brought something up to me that was interesting. In the Army, the Marines, the Navy, there's one officer supporting the decision-making process and then watching the enlisted guys execute. But in the Air Force, there's a bunch of enlisted guys supporting one officer who's taking off in that plane and in that cockpit. So what's the dynamic once you start working on F-16s? Well, I want to hear about the training for that. Like, how long is that to learn how to work on computers for F-16s? And then what's the dynamic where it's like you're the support guy, you're the mechanic guy, you're the avionics guy for one officer who's got to trust you guys. Yeah, these dudes took care of my plane. It's all going to work right when I get up in the air. Like, tell me a little bit about the dynamics of being in the Air Force, because it's exactly the opposite of being in the Army or the Marines.
Yes, very much so. I've had a chance to work with Army guys and side by side with some Marines in the Air Division. And there's a huge difference in dynamic with how each branch runs. One thing that they tell you in basic training for the Air Force is that, look, even at the lower ranks of enlisted, we will trust you, but we'll empower you and educate you with a lot of responsibility. And they put a lot on your plate. So, comparison, we have typically 3-level, 5-level, 7-level for aircraft maintenance. And the 7-level will sign off the final sign-off on the more major maintenance that's done. As, yes, this 5-level or this 3-level done a quality enough job that I'm putting my name to paper here saying that it's good to go. Well, when I worked with some Marines back in Florida, their system for that was the higher ranking individuals do a lot of the work, more mid-tier, junior NCO kind of tier, do the work, and an officer signs off that final signature saying that the maintenance or the work was done correctly. So they'll have an officer on every shift that accepts that responsibility. So in the Air Force, they put a lot of responsibility on their enlisted and especially their junior NCOs.
So tell us about, you leave for, I'm guessing they have some version of basic training, although, probably it's like a weak version because it's the Air Force. No, I'm just messing with you. So they've got some version of basic training. And then how long does it take to learn avionics? Like, I just think for somebody like you and I, who we never done anything except for maybe fly Southwest and row 23, how do they take somebody like you or I that are, maybe half a moron, didn't graduate college, and then teach you avionics? And I mean, this is some complicated shit. So how long were you in school for to learn to do what you did?
The tech school for myself, after graduating basic training, I went to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And that's where I went through an electronic principles course. And they teach you all the fundamentals of electronics, how to use multimeters, wire repair, changing out electrical connectors and such for aircraft, things like that, the basics of understanding what you're getting into. And then for F-16s, and it depends on what aircraft you're on, I went to Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas. And that was, I want to say that was about 7 months worth of training, about 9 months total between electronic principles and then the specific aircraft avionics training. And they break it down into systems. You got flight controls, you got fuels, you got radar, you got communication systems, you got GPS, and they break it down into blocks of training where you're taking small bites and learning them. And then you get taught how they communicate and work together. But until you get out into the real Air Force and you start doing these ops checks and you're working on actually broke aircraft, do you start understanding and learning how they actually work together. So while the tech school for myself at the time was pretty long and intensive, the real learning was when we got into the real Air Force and got to actually try to apply that knowledge. And then the older guys who had been around for a minute got to impart their wisdom to us.
Chris, you're going to have to look this up for us. What's the cost of production of a single F-16 airplane? Because I'm thinking all right, you take somebody like me and you. you had some work experience. I was straight out of high school. Like I said, we're probably half a moron. And then they're like, all right, you got 7 months of training, and now we expect you to fix wires on what, $70 million plane, $30 million plane?
I don't think the internet knows. It's 12.7 to 80 million.
12.7 to 80 million.
Last time I checked for records purposes, I want to say that the F-16 were around 30 million apiece.
30 million apiece.
Yeah.
And 19-year-old Scott Groves with 7 months of electrical training, which, by the way, I still don't understand electrical current. Like, I've watched some YouTube videos on how it works, and to me, it's just sorcery. I'm like, I have no clue. They're like, oh, yeah, it's always going. Even when you plug in, to me, it's sorcery. So I don't understand how electricity works. So the idea that after 7 months of training, they'll be like, hey, kid, just go fix these wires. It's going to make this $30 million piece of machinery work. It blows my mind, the amount of responsibility that are put on young men in the military, which, is a great thing. I'm really happy that I experienced it, but it's kind of crazy when you think about it, right?
Yeah. And then throw on top of that, the cherry on top is that the life of the pilot is in your hands with every piece of maintenance that you do. So
yeah, you can't have
that's not a stressor at all.
You can't have like a B- mechanic on a plane, right?
I mean, some make it through, yeah. Some make it through. So
what does that look like? So you do your 7 months of training. You knew that you wanted to serve. You knew that you wanted to be part of the mission, I guess, maybe to avenge 9/11. And then where does your career take you? Do you end up on a aircraft carrier, an Air Force base in Saudi Arabia, or can you talk about any of this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
My first base out of tech school was at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. That's up in the northern part of Utah, and the winters are extremely cold, and you're working outside trying to do wire repair often with
hell no.
frozen hands. And then the summer times are very similar to what they are here in Vegas. It'll be 105, 110, and you're just out in the open. Nowadays, they got sunshades up there, so you're working in the shade at least. But you're working out in the extreme temperatures, both hot and cold up there. And I was there for about 2 years. And then got a remote tour to Korea. So I spent a year in Osan working on F-16s. And
is that like up by the DMZ?
Yes. Osan's the closest military base we have to the DMZ.
Is that the one where, like, if North Korea decides to start a war, your life expectancy is like 90 seconds?
Yeah, it's like the sacrificial lamb to slow them down.
yeah. That's a shitty base to be at. All my buddies that were at the far northern army base, they were like, you're basically a speed bump if North Korea decides to start a war, and hopefully it will slow them down long enough to launch the planes so that we can launch a counteroffensive.
And that was the mission while I was there from 06 to 07 was that, you come in, you get the aircraft in the air ASAP. Mm-hmm. And then you hunker down.
I mean, these things, they take an F-16, for example, I think from what I've seen on National Geographic, it takes a long time to load bombs and ammo and get them up and running and do the pre-flight check. Like, if there was a true emergency situation, this isn't like a prop plane where you can just start it up and take off. Like, from start to finish, how long roughly does it take to get a military aircraft in the air? Is it 10 minutes, 10 hours?
It depends. For normal training, you could be sitting out there with the aircraft running before it taxis out. Half an hour. But an alert aircraft, at least for F-16s at the time, it may be different standards now, was 90 seconds.
Oh, so you can get...
But that's a prepared alert aircraft that's loaded. All the avionics systems are preset, and it's ready to go. The pilot needs to get in, get the engine cranked, and just turn stuff on, taxi out, and go.
Wow. Yeah, and without giving away too many military secrets, which you can't, I have to imagine all over the globe there's these on-call units. I can just speak back to post-Korean War. One of my grandfather was in the Korean War in the military right thereafter, and he was at an Air Force base in Germany, and they're like, yeah, we always had a bunk of pilots, maybe 10 of them, that were always, and this is in the 60s, so, pre-Cold War, but post-World War II, so not a whole lot going on, but I guess Vietnam. And he's like, there's always just 10 pilots in Germany on call, ready to get in a bomber and take off at any time. I'm like, that's terrifying. I mean, I'm kind of happy that it exists, but it's also terrifying.
Yes, and I mean, that still holds true. You always have contingency plans for the what-ifs.
Right.
And while I'm not knowledgeable on all of those, I know they exist, And I know that, we have intelligence.
Yeah.
For the most part, nothing should be a true surprise unless somebody does something really crazy.
Right.
So
what on a day-to-day basis, like I remember in the Army, just every day there was nothing to do. So you would like take this apart, put it back together. Sweep the motor pool, like spill oil, clean up oil. And it was so annoying as somebody who like appreciates efficiency. Yes. The Army and the Marines, and I think probably the Army and the Marines, they just create busy work because there's just not enough shit for grunts to do. Like if you're not shooting your gun or getting in physical shape or learning some skill set to like set a mine, there's really not a whole lot to do. So we'd go down to the motor pool and like the NCOs would just make up work. They'd be like, we think there's a oil spill there. And I'm like, I don't think so. And then they just like drop a quart of oil on the ground. They're like, well, now there's an oil spill. Clean it up. Be like, all right, well, that's fun. Let me just like ground dry sweep into the ground for 2 hours trying to clean up a motor oil spill. So like on a daily basis, I imagine these planes are so complex. Is there shit to do on a plane every single day if you're trying to keep it in a well-maintained state?
Yeah, when you're dealing with older aircraft like the F-16, there's always something broke. A normal squadron will typically be around 24 aircraft, and you're manned appropriately for that. And then you got 3 different shifts a day, and they're just old. And they fly hard, they turn hard. They get put through the ringer a lot, and they fly sometimes 2-3 times a day because they're shorter sorties than other larger aircraft or even drones. And so they're rode hard and put up wet, and then somebody has to fix them.
Right.
And and we're typically really busy. I can't think of a time when I was on F-16s that we weren't busy. Mm-hmm. Training days or down days for something that otherwise you'd think that we're going to be slow. Nope, we still got work to do. There's always work to do, and job security, I guess. But
job security.
But tons of experience. You're always working, so you get to deep dive into the systems. You start learning a lot more about it, and it becomes more and more intriguing because you're dealing with newer technology, even though it's older aircraft compared to what we may see in our automobiles daily. Yeah, and it's okay. Well, while this is Vietnam era technology, it's still more advanced than a lot of stuff that you'll see in your automobiles nowadays. So it's pretty cool in that sense.
That is cool. And I remember seeing something at the height of like the Gulf War, something insane, and this probably had a lot to do with the sand. That like for every hour of air travel, there was something like a 17-man ground crew and like 120 hours of man work for every like 1 hour the helicopter was in the air. Do you have any feel for like, all right, for every hour that pilot is in the plane, riding it hard and turning hard and doing all that stuff and afterburners and all this crazy shit that I don't even understand how those planes don't break apart the second, they hit Mach 1 or whatever. Do you have any feel for like how many man hours it takes to maintain and refuel and refurbish a plane, for like how many man hours on the ground have to happen for every man hour in the air?
Just for if there's nothing out of the ordinary broke, there's no unscheduled maintenance, just a standard day for aircraft. I would say if we had one sitting out on line, we want to fly it. There's at least 3 hours of preparation put into it. Then after it flies, there's probably another additional 3-ish hours put into it to refuel, to make sure nothing did break. Right. Everything still looks good. And, you do that at least in between every sortie. And if there's 3 sorties a day, those sorties are typically about an hour to an hour and a half. So we're looking at 4.5 hours of flying, but we'll look at somewhere around 12 to 15 hours worth of preparation maintenance.
And how many humans per each prep crew is on that?
You'll typically have one, maybe, if there's good manning with your unit, 2 crew chiefs, one experienced, one inexperienced, but out there helping. As far as avionics technicians, you'll typically have one person flying solo, sometimes 2 if it's larger task, as far as getting things ready. Then you throw into the configuration of aircraft, whether or not they have certain test munitions or training, training munitions or certain types of pods loaded, reconfiguring, that adds additional time. So usually the pro supers always kind of schedule intel numbers and configurations to where you don't have a whole lot of work and changeover in between each sortie. And there can be a lot of work, but usually it's at the very beginning of the flying day and then again at the very end of it.
So there might be, you mentioned the avionics, the munitions, the supervisor, for lack of a better term. There might be 5, 6, 7, 10 different specialists coming by and inspecting that plane, their little part, and then you got the fuel guys, and then there's probably a lube guy, and then there's a clean the windshield guy. Like you're probably having how many people work on a plane on any given day? 5, 10, 20?
A lot. Yeah, because especially with the 3 different shifts, because with aircraft, 2 alphas, what we are aircraft maintenance, you'll have a crew chief, you'll have an avionics technician, you have weapons technicians. Okay, that's your 3 primary. Well, that's not counting the people who work in the support section inside that are issuing out tools, checking tools back in, the POL or fuel people that come by. If you are loading munitions, then you got ammo that has to deliver stuff via trailer. Then you got all the back shop technicians in case there's other little things that go on, like sheet metal, non-destructive inspection crews. And then if there are parts to change, you got a supply office, an LRS, that they're ordering the parts, picking them up for you, bringing you the parts back to the unit. And then that's not even counting your supervisory levels.
Oh my God. So, and then you got the pilots. If the plane calls for a co-pilot. So you mentioned maybe 24 aircraft in a squadron. If that squadron has to deploy overseas, you got 24 pilots, co-pilots, supervisors, all of the job. You might have a couple hundred people deploying to support 24 aircraft. Easy
on the low end, yes.
On the low, holy shit, man!
Especially with 24-hour, 7-day ops in a deployed location, you'll have more manning. And it takes a lot of people doing their jobs and doing their jobs right just to get one aircraft off the ground for one sortie.
Oh my goodness. These planes better be like an amazing force multiplier in real world situations to like justify that many humans, right?
I mean, you would think, but the Air Force is trying to thin out not the capabilities, increase the capabilities, but thin out the footprint. And we have a term now, what we call multi-capable airmen. So while I may be an avionics technician, and while this is nothing really new, actively pushing people into this direction is a little new of, we need you to also be a crew chief for certain tasks.
Right.
So I might work on the computers, but I also may go out there and, depending on the situation, help change a tire.
Right.
Maybe help change an engine, do crew chief stuff, do a refuel and things like that. And they're moving more in that direction to where we have less and less people doing things, but each of these individuals are more capable than we were when we had random number, 100 people doing it. Well, can we do it with 40? And let's see how that works.
Right.
And there's a lot of that going on right now, especially with us not actively engaged in war. We're out of Afghanistan.
Hey, which is nice for a change.
Yes, it's nice, but it brings about its own issues, or it makes the culture and the climate different. So you have to readjust your mindset of what the focus is. The focus is, maybe we're preparing for a future problem.
Right.
And then we start practicing and training for that. The pilots start flying for that future problem issues. And it depends on our adversaries what that future problem may or may not be.
I was going to use a different D word, but I'll use difficult. Are pilots difficult? Because they're kind of like the tip of the spear. They're walking in. It's like the red carpet's kind of rolled out for them. They get in the plane and get to do the cool shit. Is there like a weird stratification between like the officers and the enlisted guys, or are they really thankful to you all for the work you do and there's like a cool relationship there, like they're taking you out for a case of beer after work? Or is there a real like I'm the throttle jockey, you're the mechanic, don't talk to me?
Well, much like anywhere in society,
right.
You have a little bit of all of it.
Okay.
been on the mic for hot refuels when there's a GPS problem and there's a colonel in the seat. And, I ask a simple question and he's just chewing my ass out over something. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then you get the guys who are just super cool and super thankful. So, I mean, very much like every aspect of society.
Right.
You got your good, bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of guys are thankful that each other exist.
Yeah.
Like there's lots of trash talking, just like between the different branches.
Right.
Being in the chair force now and such, but it's all in fun and never malicious. I mean, maybe there's some people that are malicious out there, but they kind of get weeded out in the culture because we all, even if we won't admit it, we need each other.
Right.
And those pilots aren't going to go out there and refuel their own aircraft. And oftentimes, and you'll see it in some of the Air Force memes and jokes where a pilot's manual is this thick, but we got 3 piles of technical data for the maintainer and the avionics technician to keep that working right for them.
Yeah, fair.
So they have to know how to operate it. We have to know how to operate it and how it operates.
Fair.
So,
and most importantly, have you ever seen a crew drop a bomb on the ground? Like they're loading something up and like a 2,000-pound bomb just crashes to the cement.
I have not been in position to see it, but I've been on the radio at different bases. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Even the folks we make fun of for not having as much work as others are highly professional.
Yeah.
And but there have been situations where something gets dropped on the ground.
Oh my goodness.
And yes, there's tons and tons of precautions.
Right.
But we're not dealing with the dummy munitions that we were dealing with during World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and all that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technology in these munitions now. They have their own computers. And, it's not simply just dropping something off of a wing and hoping it hits.
Right. Yeah.
Lots and lots of technology. So the mere fact that they drop on the ground is just more unfortunate, not so much as a threat. Now, if one ever caught on fire,
now you have a problem.
Any random reason,
run.
Yes.
Run fast.
Yeah, there's other professionals that'll come take care of that. Get the hell out of Dodge.
I remember in basic training, you get all the leftover crap in basic training, especially in the Army. Even at Fort Riley, we had a lot of leftover crap. And I remember we were breaking open some cases of mortars. And I think, if I remember correctly, you start with the 60s. And then just in case you end up at like a mechanized unit like I did, you do hang like a single 120 round because they're probably not cheap. And a 120 round's like about the size of a football, but it's probably 40 pounds. It's like trying to lift a heavy child over your head and hold it there until they say release. And I just remember looking over at the crate and it was like, the writing wasn't in Vietnamese, but there was something where it was like clearly lot case for blah, 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 1967. And I'm going through base training in 97. And I'm like, wait, this stuff's 30 years old. And they were just telling us, they just finished telling us if there's a misfire, duck, because if the tube explodes, you're probably going to die. And I'm like, wait, this shit's 30 years old? Like my grandpa had a Cadillac that wouldn't run right after 8 years. How am I going to trust this stuff after 30 years? And sure enough, in basic training, when you do the firing line at Fort Benning, they have all the mortars set up, and then there's like a steep cliff drop off just in case you get a short fire. Or I think that's what they call it. And so sure enough, the NCO drops around with the guy and he just grabs him and like dives back. And, we didn't know what the problem was. Well, when it hit, it just went poop. And like just a short, maybe 20 foot arc off the cliff. And, had we not been off a cliff, that round just
would
falling.
have been right there.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah.
And scared the shit out of him. He was white. He just ghost white. We had no idea why. We're like, what's the problem? He's like, that thing was supposed to go like 400 yards, man.
Not 4.
Not 4, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was brutal. But every time that we did live fire, I was like, oh man, this shit is left over from Vietnam. And then I would think to myself, I'm sure the Air Force has better ammunition.
As far as how old they are, I don't really know. But there's a lot of safety precautions for sure. And usually, when you're taking a munition off of a trailer, we got the jammers that they come up and they have different configurations to handle different munitions, transferring it from the trailer to a jammer in order to drive it up and load it onto an aircraft, because you're probably not trying to pick up a 500-pound bomb.
No.
And
Hard
somebody
pass.
Somebody with a speed handle is over there struggling to get it in the hole, and you got 4 or 5 people just dying. So lots of safety precautions. And once again, lots of very professional individuals that, while we make fun of each other all the time, I'm glad they're doing their job.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're glad I'm doing mine. So it all works out in the end.
Nice. So tell me about your side hobby, side hustle, however you think about it. When did you get into firearms, and then when did you decide to start doing instruction for the NRA? And I guess first of all, you should tell people what the NRA is, because a lot of people listening might not know what the NRA is.
The NRA, most people know it from the political point of view, is National Rifle Association. They do have a very heavy political presence, and people love them and hate them for that. And they're one of the longest running pro-gun organizations, I guess is the best way to put it. I probably should know a little bit more detail about that in America, because, everybody talks about Second Amendment rights, two-way rights, this and that and another. Well, they've been advocates of that for a very, very long time. And I don't want to say it has gotten lost, but it's lost with modern technology and people only getting clips of things, is the training.
Yeah.
And the promotion of being a responsible firearms owner is something that they were founded on.
Yeah.
And that they still have great curriculum and things like that promote responsible firearm ownership. They're not out here promoting anybody to be Yosemite Sam or anything like that.
You don't go to the NRA to become John Wick.
Yes, exactly. And that's something that I think gets lost, but something that even folks who aren't as pro-gun would support, because it's important. And that gets lost with the whole political talk of today, because, we look for reasons to get upset and hate and disagree and argue. So, I mean, for me, I wish that was more on the forefront of what people knew about the NRA.
Yeah.
Because that's where it was founded at, was, responsible gun ownership, training, knowledge, education, all that stuff that I don't think anybody will argue against.
Right.
But politics is politics.
It is funny when you look at the numbers, obviously the NRA does have a large lobbying wing, but people will take the entire NRA and be like, it's the largest lobbyist in the entire country, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, no, not really, because 70% of their budget goes towards hosting events, certifying trainers, holding classes for responsible gun ownership, firearm safety, all, that's 60-70% of their budget, and then the rest of the budget is the political wing and the lobbyist wing, which there's some things they do that I really agree with, some things they do that I disagree with, but you're right, it's lost on the average non-gun owning citizen that a majority of what they do is what we're talking about, gun safety, right? Like, I want to be able to responsibly take some friends of mine from the Jiu Jitsu studio to the fire range for the first time, teach them how to properly handle a firearm, and I know how to do that for myself, but being able to articulate that to another human being when the stakes are so high, when you're handling a live firearm, like, I didn't know how to do that. So I hire somebody like you to teach me how to do that, because you've been certified through them to do it. So talk a little bit about your firearms experience, or how you fell in love with this and decided to go that direction.
My firearms experience started when I was about 6 years old.
Of course, because you're from Tennessee.
Yeah. And I was given a little lever action 22 and was told, don't shoot your cousin.
This is the most redneck thing I've ever
Go out
heard.
in the woods and have fun, shoot at leafs, shoot at twigs, at a whatever, for a 22, I mean, for most people, that might be what airsoft is today.
Right.
But for me growing up, not that I come from a heavy family of hunters, but I've come from a family that is very in love with their guns,
right,
and such, and collectors. Some are better shooters than others, but it was a normal part of life. And for the first time when I joined the military, was, other than what they gave me, was the first time I was not with a firearm. Most of it was just going out recreational shooting most of my life. But as I grew a little bit older, going through basic training, shooting M16, things like that, it was pretty easy because that's something I've been doing for a long time. A lot of people, it was their first experience with firearms. Fast forward to, several years in the military, several years overseas, I come back home and the assault weapons ban has sunset. Now I can go buy an AR-15 or an AK-47 again. Whereas earlier in life, either didn't have the money to or wasn't old enough at the time.
Right.
So now it's, let's really get some experience with this. And after Korea, spent 3 years in Germany, still on F-16s. And then after I left Germany, I went to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida and got the honor of being in the first unit of F-35s in the DOD.
Oh, F-35s. Is that the Raptor? Is that
No, that's F-22.
F-22.
F-35's Lightning. Or Lightning 2, I guess.
What do those cost? About $52 million each or something?
At the time, about 130 a piece.
130 million a piece?
At the time.
Holy shit.
Obviously, as you buy more and time, cost of production goes down. What they cost now, I don't know. But in the early days when nobody else had them and we were the first unit, they were expensive.
What year publicly do the F-35s go into service and, pilots got to get trained up on them and you guys got to know how to do the avionics because they're still in service, right? Well,
And the program's still growing because things like the F-16 and F-15 are getting old.
Right.
They're still very, very useful. Most have overflown their flying hours by design many times over, and that's a huge credit to the people who have been maintaining them over the years, and the original design lasted far longer than what we expected. So a combination of a lot of things. But right now, the F-35 is the primary new aircraft for fighters. That's more and more bases are being stood up. And I was at Eglin Air Force Base in 2010.
Okay.
We got our first aircraft, I want to say, in 2011. And prior to that, we're doing a lot of standing up, establishing programs, protocol, and things like that. And I'm just not an experienced, but not a young staff sergeant at the time. And lots of responsibility of setting up something, especially with the tech school curriculum, that's going to influence future aircraft maintainers for decades.
Right.
Another generation or two. And, it's a great honor to be a part of something that very few people get a chance to be, because how many times do we get brand new aircraft like that?
Yeah.
It's not very often. So to be one of the first on the program was a huge honor, and poured a lot of my heart and soul into helping set that foundation so that it would be stable for future generations.
That's awesome. And in the Air Force, is it the same as the Army where non-commissioned officer starts at E5?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So just for people that don't have a military background, they rank enlisted people in all the military, E1 through E9. E1 is you're a scrub, you're a private, you're brand new. Do they call them privates in the Air Force? Or what do they call
airmen?
Them? Airmen. Yeah. So you're you're an airman or you're a private, and then E9 is basically you're running. If you got to take that, by the way, go for it.
Nope.
E9 is basically you're running shit. You're about as high as you can get on the enlisted scale. At E5 is kind of that first level where you start having responsibility and a responsibility for other people in training. So once you get to that E5 level, I imagine in the Air Force, now you're supervising a crew, right? You're signing off on the maintenance and things of that nature.
Yeah.
It's your ass in the hot seat if something goes wrong.
More so, it's your first real deep dive into being responsible for other people's actions.
Yep.
As an E4 senior airman for us, you start to experience those things. You kind of dip your toes into the water. If you've gone through airman leadership school, then even without the rank, they throw you into the deep end.
Yeah.
But as long as you've gone through the school, they'll throw you in the deep end. You'll get your first troops, people that you're responsible for. But E5 is definitely where you're deep diving. That 100% is the backbone of the enlisted force.
Yeah.
Because that's where you got your combination of youth and some experience.
Right.
And they haven't been calloused yet.
You're not bitter. You're not bitter old man.
You're not the grizzled old NCO yet. By the time you make E6, which is tech sergeant for us, then maybe you start getting a little calloused because those years as an E5, you're just being rode hard and put up wet. You really, really are. You're working the longest hours.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to make sure those younger airmen behind you can eventually get to your level of expertise.
Right.
Because we have this attitude in the Air Force that you don't want to do that same job forever.
Right.
You want the people behind you to get to your level, so that also pushes you to grow, become better, and you're bringing people along. So while you're trying to move up that ladder of experience, of rank, of everything that's promotional, I guess, just advancement in life, career, both personal and professional, you don't want to travel that journey alone. You want to bring those younger airmen with you and help develop them, because if you're doing it right, they're going to do a better job than you.
Yes, I mean, somebody's got to sweep the motor pool behind you.
Yes. Somebody's got to sort the color of the rocks out.
Exactly. That's one thing that I think gets overlooked about the military, because I remember, I think it's when, and I'm going to screw some of this up, and I'm sure the training nomenclature has changed, but when I was in 25 years ago, it was like when you went from E4 to E5 or E5 to E6, you went to BNOC, which was like basic non-commissioned officer school. Yep. And then when you before you could become an E7, you went to ANOC, advanced non-commissioned officer school. And it was really like, I think it was about 2 months, here's the training on how you become, you move from a grunt and a private and a peon to like, now you have these stripes, you have to have a leadership role, right? And for a lot of people, this is the first time they've ever led anybody in their entire life. So the way that the military turns out leaders, and like you said, anywhere in society, there's some horrible ones and there's some great ones. But the fact that they've really systematized the idea of creating leaders, it's a pretty amazing thing that you can take any moron like you or me, and the military can turn you into a competent leader for the most part.
Yes, I mean, worst case scenario is that you're a decent manager. Mm-hmm. And but yes, before you become a NCO, you will go to Airman Leadership School. Before you become a senior NCO, you'll go to a few different schools. There's an NCO Academy, then there's Senior NCO Academy, and then there's several different schools, some of them strictly online, in between all that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good stuff. This is something that I know for a fact from experience and having friends who are in the Army, Marines, and such like that, is that the Air Force pours so much money and resources into educating their enlisted that it's crazy. I mean, I'm just over 19 years now, and maybe before I retire, I'll sit down and I'll add up how much each of these schools, the technical training, just for education, how much has the Air Force invested into me? Yeah. And I'm sure it's a ridiculous amount of money. Back in 2003 when I came in, it was, I want to say that the average cost was somewhere around $45,000, $50,000 just to get somebody through tech school.
Right.
And, all these other schools that they have, I know for myself that obviously I've done the Airman Leadership School, the Non-Commissioned Commissioned Officer Academy, the Senior Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, the Senior Enlisted Joint Professional Military Education 1 and 2.
Right.
And then we have a course 14, and we don't have a course 15 anymore, I don't believe. That might be something that, because it's changing all the time. They're always refining it. I mean, that's just off the top of my head, the things I can remember that I've been through.
Because if you think about it, like in the quote unquote real world, there is no 2-week vacation in between. Okay, I'm a loan officer. Now they're going to make me a loan officer manager. Well, what they do in the loan business is they're like, cool, now you get the corner office. You were a good producer. Supervise these 10 people. And it's like, I don't know. I've never been a manager or leader in my whole life. Like there is no take a 2-month break to go to Synergy 1 leadership school to learn management techniques to actually pour into your people. It's like, well, read a couple books, man. Watch some YouTube videos. I don't know. So if you can think back 12, 15 years to when you went to the basic Airman Leadership School or some of the advanced, what was eye-opening for you to step into the next role as a leader? What were some things that you learned in the military where you're like, oh, that's kind of eye-opening, or maybe that's counterintuitive or whatnot? Can you think back that far? I know you're becoming an old man like me, but can you think back that far to some of those leadership schools where you're like, Oh yeah, man. That was a nugget I wouldn't have thought about. And I'm so glad that I got to go to that school.
Not so much anything that was brand new to me. I mean, I guess a little bit of background is long prior to ever joining the Air Force, I had always had a fascination with highly successful leaders. So I was always a reader of tons and tons of books about leadership prior to ever even considering joining the military. So for me, a lot of the concepts and things like that weren't new, but I guess rather than being surprised or kind of being like, oh, they actually teach this, it was more of a, man, I'm so thankful that they are teaching this to people, because some of this stuff is just, man, you wouldn't have gotten this anywhere else. And it's so important, especially if you're going to work with a group of people. I mean, if you're just working solo and you don't have coworkers, you don't have superiors or subordinates, then that's fine that you don't ever know that information. But there's, when it comes to the realm of leadership, one of the things that, like I said, I was thankful at each level that I was getting to kind of complement the knowledge that I had already studied and learned over years and years of just reading and being, I don't want to say obsessed, but very enamored by people who were genuine leaders, not managers, but true leaders that drove things like innovation and took companies or organizations, a sports team or anything like that, from scrubs to champs.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was always very encouraging. It empowered me, made me more confident in my responsibilities every time I had to move up a level based off a rank or position. So for me, in my personal experience, I was just thankful that, because I didn't have a remote idea that the military actually invested that much into their people.
Yeah.
We all kind of understand the stereotypes.
Right.
And you think a certain way about military personnel, and you think about this hardcore discipline and sir, yes, sir, and things like that from the standard non-experienced person's point of view. And then to actually be in the military and say, oh, it's way more than that.
Yeah.
There's way more to it. And yes, it's like, this is awesome.
I actually had a person ask me, so did you ever, were you ever tempted to shoot your drill sergeant? I'm like, the entire military is not like Full Metal Jacket. Like, if your entire experience in the military is Saving Private Ryan, Full Metal Jacket, and like an officer and a gentleman, you need to like expand your conversational horizon to people that are in the military.
It is. And I mean, but that's what we all know.
Right. With your shaved head, your shaved head, you got a little private pile in you. You could be
maybe. I mean, but it's crazy because being in the Air Force. Oh, what do you fly?
Yeah.
It was like, well, I don't fly anything.
Right.
But you're in the Air Force.
Right.
Not everybody in the Air Force is pilots.
Yeah. There's about 1/100th of the people in the Air Force actually fly. Maybe 1/1000th.
And much to what we were talking about earlier, how many people does it take? How much time, money, and resources in general does it take to get one aircraft up one time? Far exceeds how many pilots we need for that one time.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's a lot of the stuff. Obviously, we all go in with the stereotypes in our head of what we think it's going to be like, and some stuff, very little, is what we think it's going to be like. Basic training was not what I anticipated to be. There's a lot more running than what I thought there would be. And I used to love to run until I was yelled at to run.
Yes.
And then it wasn't so enjoyable anymore.
Totally. I ran so much in the Army that I like vowed to never run again. So then I got fat. And then I got married and I fell in love with running again. I was meeting this group like every morning in LA. We were running through Griffith Park and doing trail running. I was all into it. Like I was in great shape. And then after I got divorced, I realized, oh no, I still hate running. I was just hiding from my ex-wife in the morning, who's a lovely person, but we didn't need to be married. And so like for me, running was like misery in the military. And then it was a form of escapism in my first marriage. And so people will be like, hey man, let's train for a half marathon. I'm like, hey man, fuck you. I'm never going to voluntarily run again. I rather do boxing to get punched in the face, Jiu Jitsu, get my wrist snapped, anything other than running for pleasure, because it's not fun.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, when I first started training Jiu Jitsu, I learned real quickly because growing up, for me, the high school I went to, we had football, baseball, and basketball.
Yeah.
We didn't have cross country. We didn't have track. We didn't have a wrestling team or anything like that. And I had no clue. My first probably 3 or 4 jiu-jitsu classes, I had to sit down outside and regain my composure after class before I felt like I could even safely drive home.
Yeah.
Because I was so winded and just so gassed. And, and obviously they're like, hey, you all right? And and that was when I was, I dipped my toes in the water when we were in Florida. And then it was like, yeah, you know what? I'm just going to keep running to work on my cardio. This is pretty difficult. This is not what I thought it was.
Yeah, because imagine running with like a 200-pound guy leaning on your chest.
Yeah.
That's kind of what jiu-jitsu is when you're first
Yes.
getting started. When you get a little bit better, you can cheat, you can kind of slow down, and you know how to modulate your breathing and whatnot.
Yep.
But when you first start, it's like running a marathon with a 200-pound dude laying on your chest.
Yeah,
It's miserable.
Absolutely. And then, I took the introductory first week when I was in Florida, and then that was all I was doing. My daughter at the time was only 2 years old, and it's like, I'm just gonna go home and be dad.
Yeah,
it's okay. It's okay. I'm just. And then, fast forward, not even 2 years later, we're here in Vegas, stationed over here at Nellis Air Force Base to help set up another F-35 unit, and heck, I was 4.5 years, and I didn't. I know they had kung fu classes on base at one point, and we took our daughter to go kind of check that out because, I grew up around martial arts even without practicing certain ones.
Right.
I had a lot of respect, which is my story with jiu-jitsu. Lots and lots of respect because I knew it wasn't easy.
Right.
I just didn't know how hard it was for a beginner. And fast forward, and I've left Nellis Air Force Base, and I get PCA'd up to Creech Air Force Base out in the middle of the desert. And
How far is Creech outside of Vegas?
If you're going from Nellis Air Force Base, it's about an hour to hour and 15, depending on traffic.
Yeah.
So I was making that drive because we lived in base housing at the time. And then I don't even remember where I saw it. I saw where they had jiu-jitsu on base. I was like, oh, okay, well, let's give this a try again. My daughter's a little bit older. She's 6, 7-ish years old. She's tried dance, she's tried soccer and all that. But I'm going to sign up and do it with her so that she's not hesitant or scared. And I told my coach very first night, I was like, look, I'm only doing this for 1 month, dude. So my daughter sees that it's okay. She's not scared. Try to be that example rather than the person that you should do this. And then I never do it. And he's like, yeah, I hear you. But he said it in a way with a smirk that no, that's not good. So I know, I can already tell.
Yeah, you'll get addicted just like everybody else.
We only had training twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays on base, which I guess a plug they still do on Nellis Air Force Base.
Nice.
Mondays and Thursdays for the base population. They got kids and adult class. And that, we're driving to class maybe 3 weeks into it. I'm already gearing up thinking, you know what? Yeah, it's rough. And I respect it even more than my 1 week trial back in Florida. And but I'm super busy, being NCO and responsibilities with work. And my daughter tells me on the drive over there, she's like, Daddy, I really like jiu-jitsu. I want to do this. And she had never said that about soccer, cheerleading, dance, or anything. She kind of done it just because we're like, hey, try it out. And she's like, oh, all right. And then she just looked at me and told me, she's like, I really like this. I was like, damn it. Now I'm going to, it's like, because, you got a daughter also. Mm-hmm. We definitely love that bond with our daughters.
Yeah.
And that was something that kept me doing jiu-jitsu initially.
How long you and your daughter been doing it now?
My daughter, now that she's a moody teen,
yes,
no longer trains. She's a high schooler. She doesn't have time for that. But I continue to train, and not counting multiple deployments since I started, it's been about 5 years with about half that time I've been gone.
Yeah.
So,
I get the feeling, I haven't met your daughter yet. I get the feeling she's a badass. I know she shoots. I know she used to do Jiu Jitsu. She's a teenage girl, like all teenage girls are going through their thing. But I get the feeling you have a very tough daughter.
She is a very mentally resilient girl. She's way tougher than what she will ever admit. It's almost like she tries to be girly girl sometimes,
right?
Because
just to offset the toughness.
Well, when we were living in Florida, we had a trampoline. Long story short, she didn't fall off, but she landed funny and broke her leg. So she just sat down and kept playing with her toys with her little friends. We were having a little cookout at the house that day. And when it came time to get off the trampoline, she didn't want to get off and walk. So my wife picked her up, carried her in. It's nap time. I get home from being out in the woods, going shooting with the guys. And the wife tells me what's going on. I say, okay, well, let's just take her to the doctor. And she's got a snapped leg.
Holy shit.
And she never cried or anything. And the only time she started to get upset or cry was when the doctor wanted her to just straighten her leg out. It didn't need to be set. It was a clean break, but it wasn't like fractured or anything like that. And it scared her because she knew she was hurt.
Right.
And the doctor was like, can you like calm her down? I'm like, yeah. And I just she was on one of them tables, leaned up kind of like we are in the chairs right here. And I just kind of laid over her waist and I looked at her. I said, look, sweetie, if he hurts you, I'll hurt him. And she just looked at me and went, okay. And the wife told me that the doctor had a look on his face that like he was really uncomfortable.
Right.
And, but she didn't cry. She didn't tear up. They done everything they needed with no hassles, no problem. And every time she's ever like gotten hurt as a kid, when you know it hurt,
right,
she's not going to cry. And she never has. And, the only time I've ever seen my daughter cry was I got onto her pretty harsh for something I don't even remember now.
Yeah.
And she cried really hard over that, but I think that's because Dad got onto her.
Right.
But physical things, no.
Yeah.
Mentally tough things, Jiu Jitsu, no. There wasn't anything about any of it that, if she got hurt or anything like that, she was always very, very resilient. So, very blessed with my daughter. I'm not sure I done anything right. Maybe it was the wife.
Yeah.
But we're very blessed with the attitude mostly of our daughter. So
see, she's going to end up being like me where, God forbid somebody passes, you go to a funeral, you keep a stern face, whatever, it just is what it is. You're there for the other people to support them and, just like buck up. And then I see some mildly sad coming of age sitcom. And I'm like, oh my God, Chuck died or, whatever, Betsy, whatever. She got her heart broken. So it's like, in real life, I'm like, no, you don't cry. It's just like, this is what we got to deal with. This is real life. Life is tough sometimes. But then if I am in some like escapism, like a book or a movie, I'm like, and my wife's like, God, you're such a pansy. You cry at like every movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know, but it was like so sad. Like a mildly disturbing episode of Grey's Anatomy. And I'll cry like a little girl, Dad's funeral, when he passes one day, I'll probably be like, it's okay, I'm here for the family, I gotta be strong for my sister, strong for my mom. And it's like, we're psychos, like we all have our own shit.
And I mean, I think it depends on experiences in life also. I mean, it took one mortar attack in Iraq for me to get over being scared of dying. And it's like, well, I have zero control over that.
So you were in Iraq and insurgents started lobbing mortars?
Yeah, every day. Rockets and mortars every day.
Like for real every day, you're just hearing random explosions.
Yes.
Holy shit.
And this is...
Can you tell us what Air Force Base you were at? Or is that...
Yeah, we were at Balad Air Force Base in Iraq. And for the wonderfully hot summer months and dust storms.
It's like 130 sometimes in the middle of Iraq, isn't it?
Yeah, it was rough.
Fuck. And those metal planes, they must be real hot when it's 120, 130 out.
If it's been flying outside and sitting outside and not pushed back into a hangar and you have to get on top of one to crack a panel to get to certain parts, then yeah, you want to be careful. So it's there's a lot of unique opportunities to hurt yourself.
Yeah. Especially when you're just sitting around like trying to get some downtime and there's mortars being lobbed into the base. That sounds pretty miserable.
Yes. And I mean, and I don't know the complete history of it, but the little bit that I do remember what they did tell us was that these rockets and mortars weren't necessarily because we were the American military or the Air Force there doing what we were doing. I think it had something, please don't quote me on this internet. If I remember correctly, they had been doing that to their own people since the 80s or something like that, when Saddam Hussein seized farmland and created an Air Force base there for the Iraqis. And we came in, we just took over. But they had been doing that type of stuff to their own base for years. Maybe not as often as they were to us, but from the way they explained it to us when we first got there, this was not something new and wasn't personal per se.
Right, or that's what they tell you to make you feel better.
Yeah, maybe it was just all the kind of, okay, well, they don't really hate us. Maybe it was complete propaganda and lying to us, maybe not. But
so who's your security force? Like if you're on an Air Force base, obviously the Air Force has to do their thing, get planes in the air, but you also don't want the base to get overrun. Was it like regular Army doing patrol, security forces, Marines?
Typically Army and Air Force security forces.
So the Air Force does have ground pounders and people that do security and okay, got it.
And they're just called security forces, same as military police in the Army.
Got it.
So lots and lots of those guys out there because obviously.
So those poor guys don't even get the glory of working on the planes. They're just like, they might as well sign up for the Army because they're.
Yeah, it's funny because like in most parts of society and being a human, for the people that don't do what we do, we come up with derogatory terms. And security forces is possibly the, unless you're special forces, combat controller, pararescue, or something like that, is probably one of the few career fields that's not an aircraft mechanic that aircraft mechanics have a lot of respect for.
Yeah.
And vice versa, security forces has a lot of respect for us, even though we still talk the shit about each other and ASVAB scores and things like that. But we use our derogatory term called nonners.
Nonners?
Yeah, so if you're finance, working at the gym, working at the chow hall, you're a non-sortie generating entity. So the most derogatory term we could think of is nonner.
Right.
And pick any variation with an adjective in front of nonner.
Right.
And it's used, maybe not so much nowadays, because, kinder, gentler military.
Yeah. You gotta be nice.
But it's always been one of them terms that those being called nonner are way more offended than the people who are saying it intend to offend.
Of course. Did you ever get to meet any of those pararescue guys? Because that to me is the craziest job in the entire military.
It is. I've had a chance to meet a few. And, they're regular guys, man. They got a job. They're professionals at what they do.
Yeah. Can you explain to the audience who doesn't know what we're talking about what Air Force pararescue guys do?
Pararescue is one of our pararescue and combat controllers are our two most well-known special forces, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There are Army Rangers, there are Navy SEALs and things like that. But combat controllers typically are the guys on the ground calling in the radio stuff. They're embedded with other branches, whether they may be traveling with Navy SEALs, they may be with Army Rangers, but they're qualified to do a unique job within those special teams. Pararescue are kind of like the most badass EMTs you'll ever meet.
I know. Dude, reading about what they do is
that's
like
the simplest way for me to explain it.
Like a plane goes down over enemy lines. They're like, send these pararescue guys to go save them. It's like, what?
Let me jump out of this helicopter. Let me do all the dangerous stuff to go out there and risk my life to save that of another.
Yeah.
And it's I don't think there's anybody that doesn't have respect for folks who do those types of jobs, because even if you don't have a clue, you have at least a little bit of an understanding that they're just not letting anybody do this.
Right.
So there's a lot to accomplish. They have to be highly intelligent in more things than probably what I can even begin to be intelligent about.
Yeah, because I remember reading like some of these pararescue guys, they got to be part doctor, right? Because they got to stabilize the pilot if they come across an injured pilot. They got to be part aircraft controller to get the helicopter or the plane to come in to support their position, to pick them up and pull them out. They got to be part Navy SEAL to like fight off the bad guys that are coming across the field to get the guy who just crashed his plane. I mean, they're a really, really special breed.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say this just because I'm in the Air Force, but often I don't think they get the credit that they deserve, because for most people, there's nobody making movies about pararescue. I mean, could they? Absolutely.
That'd be a badass movie.
But, you know, you got all the Navy SEAL movies and things like that. I mean,
Delta Force and Rangers.
Charlie Sheen's pretty badass.
He is. I was always partial to Michael Biehn, because I remember like probably one of the first action movies that sticks in my mind is like, oh, my mom would be really mad if she knew that my dad let me see that movie, was Terminator 1. Yeah. And I don't know if we saw the theater. Okay, Chris, look at when Terminator 1 came out. I think it was 83 or 84. So we probably didn't go to the movies to see it, although I remember I was watching a lot of Steven Seagal movies at like the $2 Thursday. My dad would ditch work in the afternoon sometimes, and we would go see these horribly violent movies. He'd be like, don't tell your mom. Don't tell your mom. Came out in 84. Yeah, so I doubt I saw it in the theater, but I remember seeing Terminator and being like, Mom's gonna be pissed. And so, like, to me, Michael Biehn was always like the pinnacle. Yeah. I love Chuck Norris. I love Van Damme. I love Steven Seagal. But to me, Michael Biehn was like, he was the guy who fought off the Terminator, and then he was like the guy in the Navy SEAL movie, and then he was the guy in the movie The Rock, where he played the captain of the Navy SEAL unit. He's like, that would be. Some people are like, oh, I want to get on Joe Rogan, or it would be awesome one day if I get interview The Rock. I'm like, I want to find a way to interview Michael Biehn. So if anybody out there is like high school friends with Michael Biehn, I would love an introduction. I'll fly him to LA or Vegas so that he can be on the podcast. But let's go back to the NRA. Like, how long have you been working with them to work on getting certified, or where does it kind of come to your mind that like, oh, I'd kind of like a job maybe after I get out of the military, maybe I could teach this firearms thing? Because, you know, a lot of people grow up going out into the forest, shooting with their uncle, or, you know, like myself, go to the range probably once a month just to make sure that like my skills are still intact to fire a rifle or a handgun. But to really want to like teach and train and really take that responsibility for other people's safety, well-being, in some cases their life, if they're the very first time they're handling a firearm. What made you want to do that?
Well, and I'm not going to interject politics, but we know politics plays a factor into things. Right. And I was wanting to do it for several years, but I was deployed a lot here these last 5-ish years, and never really got an opportunity. And then when I returned home from my last deployment, there was an immediate opportunity to get trained and certified as an NRA instructor. I'm like, okay, this is my opportunity. But I wanted to get into it. So I've been instructing for just over a year now. I wanted to get into it because in the 2A community, where the conversation always revolves around my rights, and I don't disagree with that at all. Right. But one of the first things in my basic pistol class or my basic rifle or basic shotgun class, something that I hammer on is that what I think we need to talk more about in the 2A community is our responsibilities. Because with every right comes responsibility. Mm-hmm. And just knowing that, okay, well, yeah, I was taught the basic stuff of safety and things like that growing up as a kid, and I'm around people who are mostly safe with their firearms. It's like, but there's a lot of people out there who just don't know. Right. And I want to expose folks who aren't really deep into the community that, hey, look, it's way more than the stuff you see spouted out by politicians. It's way more than the yeehaw stuff you see on YouTube often. Right. It's like there's a high level of responsibility. And if you're new to the firearms community or to your first firearm, I want to be able to help lay that foundation, much like I was able to with the technical school with the F-35s, of safety and responsibility. So like my introductory paragraph or page for my basic classes talks about our unique right to own firearms in America. And your rights are mentioned twice in the process, but in that same little short speech, I mentioned responsibility 5 times. Yeah. Because I believe that responsibility needs to be talked about 5 times more than our rights do.
Yeah.
That's a random number. There's no logic behind that. But I do believe that we should discuss and practice responsible firearm ownership way more than just the yeehaw, look what I got, pam, pam kind of mentality.
Totally.
And with so many new firearm owners, especially since recent events that don't want to get you blocked on YouTube or anything if I mention the dirty word.
Yeah, because like in the last 2.5 years, hey, Chris, can you look this up? I think there was something like 13 million first-time firearm purchases, like first-time firearm owners. You know, great. I'm very glad they exercised their right, and maybe they came over a little bit more to our side of the political spectrum, and they exercised their right to go buy a firearm. But you're right. Not enough people are telling them your responsibility is to get some instruction, learn how to handle it, learn how to properly lock it up. I mean, if we're being honest, the test that you need to take, like in California, to become a firearms owner, it's kind of a joke. It's, 25 questions that they're like, "What? Here's the answer key, whatever." I mean, it's like, all right, well, that's not, in my opinion, as a firearm owner, that's not enough responsibility being taken by the person purchasing the firearm to exercise that right. I don't want that right to be taken away, but I love your idea of like, we need more responsibility. Did you find the number by chance, Chris?
So on average, 3 million people join the firearm world every year. But in 2020, 8.4 million people did.
Yeah.
So almost 3 times as many.
3 times as many, yeah. So you take the normal 3 million, 8 million, another year or two there of craziness. Yeah, we're probably well past 10 million people that bought their very first firearm, which is encouraging to me as a Second Amendment like absolutist, and also terrifying to me as somebody that goes to the range and there's somebody next to me loading their firearm that don't know what the fuck they're doing with muzzle control and things like that. It's a little scary. So talk to me about a little bit, without negating people's Second Amendment right, what do you feel are some of those responsibilities that firearm owners need to be taking?
Well, a lot of it, and you'll hear about this more so, it comes up in the conversations when we have these mass shootings or school shootings, things like that, that it's almost exclusively somebody that had or zero reasons or even legality of possessing that firearm. It was a high school kid who got dad's guns because dad didn't secure them. Okay, well, that kid committed a felony by acquiring a firearm that they didn't have the rights to acquire, and criminals using stolen guns, things like that.
Right.
And it's always focused on that. So part of that responsibility is, how do you secure your firearms? Do you just leave it in the console of your truck when you're out and about because you're always going to be strapped, man? Or do you just leave it in your nightstand and you got a 4 and a 6-year-old in the house? Or maybe you've got that teen that doesn't know anything about firearms.
Right.
Because we all know things you don't know, and you see stuff on TV, you talk with other people, especially with social media where it's at now. Curiosity killed the cat.
Yeah.
But maybe if that child knew and understood what that firearm was, you change the way you secure those things.
Yeah.
And that's just a small part of it.
Yeah.
If you want to be a concealed carry licensed person, then there's a whole nother realm of responsibility, legality, moral, ethical considerations to be responsible for. It's just such a deep well that we can go down that people don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And they don't think about things because they have no experience or no education.
Yeah.
One of the big things, and it's in every NRA class that you'll go to, that they bring up is that the reason behind firearm accidents can be attributed to ignorance or carelessness. Somebody like myself, I'm human. I've been around firearms my entire life. I've been handling firearms longer than most of the people who work for me have been alive. And my greatest risk, I guess you would say my greatest risk, is being careless.
Right.
Because I'm so comfortable
being
around
complacent.
them, being complacent. And that's where my greatest risk factor is. So part of me teaching isn't necessarily just teaching the student, it's reinforcing mindset in myself, because I need to be reminded of these things also, because once again, I'm human.
Right.
And I'm prone to mistakes, but I want to mitigate those as much as possible. I still pay to attend training, firearms training through other schools as time and money allows, because I don't know everything. I'm not Yoda in this game.
Right.
I'm not some ex-former Navy SEAL. I'm, for the most part, a regular dude like anybody else walking around the streets.
Yeah.
I just have unique experiences in education that I feel can benefit those in society who haven't had my education or experience.
Right.
So the ignorance part, I mean, that's the part very few people ever try to fix because they just don't know. And almost all of my classes, I get people who are new to firearms. Many people don't even own firearms, but they're going the responsible route. They're like, hey, I want to get some education before I ever buy one. I'm like, that's such an awesome attitude.
Yeah.
And that's the first part. You got to have a good attitude. And if people go into firearm ownership with a positive attitude that, hey, look, I have to respect this, and I am accepting a higher level of responsibility within society by owning this, maybe employing it as a concealed carry option for myself for personal defense. I owe it to society to be more responsible. And I try to promote that to the greatest extent possible. And I mean, I guess that's my big reason for why I initially got into it. And then through Jiu Jitsu and practicing other martial arts, and it's how I developed the slogan for my company is a quote by Horian Gracie about martial arts and self-defense, and I'm going to butcher this quote, is more than just learning a set of techniques. And it begins with the mindset and attitude that you are worth protecting. And that's something that really hit home to me. I was like, okay, so I really want to be geared towards promoting responsible firearm ownership with my basic courses, laying that solid foundation for people to be able to grow, mature, educate, go to other instructors and get knowledge from them. I highly encourage people to, as much as you can afford the time and ammunition and finances, if this is something that you really are passionate about and learning, then learn from as many people that are legitimate. No Craigslist instructors would not advise that. But, go get that foundation. And then with Horian's quote, my company slogan is you and your family are worth defending.
And what's the name of your company? Just shameless plug.
Chapman Tactical Defense.
There you go.
You can find the website, Instagram, and Facebook.
We'll make sure we make sure we link to those in all the show notes and also on YouTube. So this becomes the trickier question. I think you and I are absolutely on the same page of responsibility, right? My thought is, if you're going to buy a $500 firearm, you probably need to initially plan on spending 2 or 3 times that much on training, on a safe, on education, what have you. What, if any of that, do you think should be mandated, right? Because I think you and I are pretty much a Second Amendment absolutionist. Yes. I believe that it's everybody's right, as soon as you're mentally able, whether we decide as a society that 16, 18, 21, doesn't matter. I'm pretty much a Second Amendment absolutionist. I don't think there should be any ban on magazine capacity size, or I don't think the ATF should be knocking on my door if I decide to buy 2 guns in the same month, or whatever the case may be. But what, if any, of that responsibility do you think should be mandated as part of the gun ownership journey, or do you think it's just up to the individual, or how do you square that in your mind, that you're obviously so passionate about responsibility, but I think you're a Second Amendment absolutionist? How do we balance those two thoughts?
My thoughts on that is, I don't think, other than for legal reasons, if you're a felon, this, that, and other, will take in consideration that I'm referring to law-abiding citizens right now. I don't think there should be any barriers. That if you pass a background check, most people who are huge advocates of background checks, universal background checks, have never looked at a 4473.
Right.
They don't know what people are actually being checked on. And here in Nevada, they have an additional layer that a gun store can't call the FBI directly for this NICS check. They call the Nevada Department of Safety. They run a local background check on you, and then the background check, they call the FBI and the NICS system. So there's multiple layers here in Nevada, which drives up the cost. It's like $25, not horrible.
Right.
But, you go to Utah, if you're a resident up there, it's like $7. And some places it's $0 because the FBI doesn't charge the gun stores this a fee. But for me, we have a saying in the Air Force that while it may not be mandated, it's still a bill that has to get paid.
Right.
And that's kind of the way I look at firearm ownership and how we should approach it. Well, we're America. Period, point blank. We're America. We were founded on some ideals. And while I don't think and I won't advocate that our government's going to knock on the door and become tyrants overnight, we know what human nature is.
Right.
And what we're prone to. And you do have to be aware and cognizant of those things. Nor do I think we're going to be engulfed in a civil war or something like that here out of nowhere. But once again, we're humans. Human nature plays a factor. But I truly believe that we should introduce firearm safety courses back into school.
Yeah.
I believe teens going in freshman year of high school are mature enough to understand. I'm not saying teach them how to shoot or anything like that. We're not prepping them for the military or to become Navy SEALs or anything like that. But I believe with all the money that we spend on so many things for the education system, that we used to have this in our education system before I was born, before you were born, that, firearm safety was a thing. And we no longer have that. So how can I expect that we have parents who aren't gun owners to teach children or their teens or young adults any type of firearm safety other than the stereotypes that they hear on the local news or see in the movies? I think that's the first step. Because not every household, my daughter's been exposed to firearms since we returned from Germany, which she was 2 years old. And firearms, not a secret to her. I've taken her to many of my competitions and such in the past and let her shoot the same competitive courses after the competition was over and such. And it might seem silly, it might seem extreme, but to kind of drive home, because, hitting a steel plate, putting a little hole in a target might not communicate the threat that, or the dangers, I guess is a more appropriate word, that's coming out of the end of that barrel. So we went out to the desert and spent time shooting pieces of fruit, watermelon, cantaloupes. Oh, now I have a visual of what happens when somebody gets shot. And it's funny, I don't play video games very much anymore, but I did used to enjoy playing some Call of Duty, mostly the zombies. Right. And my daughter would love to sit in my lap, hold the controller, and, she could only control half of it. And I was teaching her proper firearm handling with the foam cutouts from where a buddy of mine who owns a local shop called Fallout Firearms done laser engraving, custom cutouts for foam. Well, he threw the foam pieces away. Well, it's in the shape of a gun. So I had a pistol one and a rifle one. And I taught her how to not point it at anybody, treat it like it's loaded with pieces of foam that looked like a gun. Right. And one day she came to me and she's got her rifle at port and stuff walking into the kitchen, and she's like 4 or 5 years old at the time. And some people might call that child abuse. I thought it was really cute. And she is like, Daddy, we don't point guns at people. I'm like, no, ma'am, we don't. For sure. And she is like, unless it's a zombie. And I'm like, okay, we'll make an exception there. Okay, if by chance we ever come across a real zombie, then it'll be okay if you point your gun at them.
That's hilarious. You bring up an interesting point, though. You see these pictures, sometimes the memes circulate of, kids in the gymnasium in the probably 50s, early 60s prior to Kent State, learning how to clear a weapon, maybe even having like an air rifle shooting course in the gymnasium so that they learn a respect for the firearm. And I don't even know, maybe Chris can look this up, if the Boy Scouts still even have a shotgun and rifle merit badge. Because I remember when I was a kid, and it was funny. It was Chris's older brother. That's how Chris and I know each other. I was great friends with his brother, still are, but we were like best friends from kindergarten until we were in our 20s. And we went for like the rifle merit badge. And at the time, you know, we're shooting little 22s, right? Plink, plink, plink. Before we started, one of the fathers had like a 1 gallon jug that he had left in the refrigerator overnight with Jello, and it was red Jello, and he put it out there. And he's, in retrospect, he sure as hell didn't shoot it with a 22. He probably shot it with a 30-06 or a shotgun, and that thing disintegrated, and there was Jello everywhere. And the look on all of our faces of like, holy shit, that's what a gun can do.
And now you understand.
Everybody was real careful, except for Robert DeRosa, who in having a misfire, not loading, went, hey, you know, to the leader, and everybody hit the deck, and they were like, you know, it was a good learning lesson, right? And we were in a controlled environment where they were handing out 1 round at a time, load, take the safety off, fire. I hope they still do that in the Boy Scouts.
Boy Scouts of all genders can get shotgun or rifle, and additionally in Cub Scouts they still teach BBs.
Oh, okay,
nice.
That's good to know, because the Boy Scouts have pretty much completely pussified themselves. And my son's in trail life because I can't really support the Boy Scouts anymore. But I'm glad that they still do that, because you know there was a time in society, whether it was high school or the Boy Scouts or going out with the Rotary Club or your local VFW, that like most kids had an understanding of what a firearm could do. And I have to, I mean, there's no way to prove this. It's correlation, not causation. I have to think the rise of children being involved in shootings where they intentionally are shooting people, part of that has to come from the fact that there's no understanding of what the potential outcome is, or there's no understanding of like what that firearm can do. I have to believe that in my heart of hearts. And
it's that ignorance portion.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, if we're playing Call of Duty or something like that, I'm not blaming video games.
Right.
Not at all. But I play a video game because it's fun.
Right.
So if I'm shooting a bunch of stuff in there, in my mind, I'm already thinking that, well, this is just fun.
Right.
Okay. So the reality of it is skewed horribly bad. Just like if your only experience of fighting is seeing something in the movies, and being dudes, we got that ego and we walk around, I'm a badass.
Right.
And you have zero training in fighting. You're probably not a badass.
Right.
It's the same with firearms. So if what we see in the movies is sexy, it's fun, it's entertaining, same with the video games. But going to the point, shooting the gallon of Jello, shooting some fruit, that's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
You physically see it. You feel the concussion coming from the muzzle of the firearm. It's real.
Yeah.
It's not on this fake thing that we call a TV in this alternate reality. So I believe it really does drive home a different perspective. And the same can be said for families that hunt. You know, the father takes the son or the daughter out and hunt, and they get their first kill of a deer or something like that, you know, that's physically there. I'm touching this. I see, I feel, I smell. All of my senses are exposed to what actually happened.
You understand that it's dead.
Yes. And there's a reality to it that is not there when your only exposure is to what's on the TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
we were on a pig hunt in California about 1.5 years ago, and it was interesting because it was me and some of my buddies, and there was another gentleman there when we were gutting the pigs, and there was a guy there with his 5-year-old, and you know, I'm again I'm pretty Second Amendment absolutionist, but I was like, oh, that's pretty young to bring the kid out there. So I started a conversation with him. He's like, in our family we have kind of these rites of passage where at 5 years old, my son's allowed to come with me shooting, put on the head, you know, the ear protection, the eye protection, and like he can tag along and he knows where to be safely behind the firearm. So I brought him on this hunt. He did not touch a gun. At 10, I'm going to buy him a rifle, and we're going to go back on this hunt for pig, which killing a pig in California is like fish in a barrel because they're taking over the ecosystem. He goes, and then at 15, we're going to do a deep hike into the Canadian wilderness and get ourselves, you know, an elk or a deer or whatever. And then when he comes out of that, kind of like a bar mitzvah, he'll be a man like that. And that's the evolution, 5, 10, and 15. I was like, oh, that's such a great idea, right? Expose them to the realities of killing something early. then teach him proper firearm etiquettes, at 10 and let him do the hunting himself. And then at 15, do like, assuming like this guy's knees still work, because I don't know if my knees are going to work when my son's 15, do the deep like manhunt out into the wilderness. I'm like, what a great rite of passage. Like I'm sure myself, if I run into that kid when he's 12, 13, 17, I'm going to have no concerns about him handling a firearm irresponsibly.
Yeah.
Because he grew up knowing these things and having these rites of passage.
And those things are, I don't know if we're losing that in our society. I do have much younger friends back home that are family friends and such that grew up in very much the same way. And, man, I have such respect for that because my family's not a family of hunters. A good friend of mine that's in the Army took me duck hunting last year on Christmas
So much
Eve.
fun.
And, it was. And while I know and I kind of have that exposure and I understand the reality of it all, those are things that, man, that is generational because that kid's going to grow up, have a family of their own, pass along those values, do their child the same way, and then, it becomes great-granddad, granddad, dad, son, repeat the cycle, and that's a wonderful thing. And while we can wish that for all of our society, in reality, it's not realistic for everybody to do that, or we wouldn't have anything to hunt if everybody hunted like that.
Right.
There's no cookie cutter way of doing it.
Yeah.
My daughter's never been hunting or anything like that, but I've given her the exposure of my knowledge.
Right.
And hopefully, I believe it's good enough that I don't have to worry about her being irresponsible.
Right.
Or mishandling that firearm. If she's over a friend's house and somebody gets curious and they go in dad's nightstand, they find a pistol, she already knows if she can't stop the situation and have them put it back, to leave.
Right.
And then go tell somebody that can take control of the situation.
Yeah.
So that's something that, even if you don't expose your kids to firearms when they're younger, where they physically hold them, they see fruit or a 1 gallon jug kind of blown up by getting shot and get that reality. The NRA does have this wonderful program called the Eddie Eagle program, where it's all about it. You go in there if you're lucky enough or have the money to put somebody into an Eddie Eagle costume.
Right.
It's maybe in half an hour to an hour class, depends on how engaged the children get. But you have them watch a cartoon that goes over that scenario exactly, because at this point, most kids haven't gone out and gone shooting or anything like that. So their introduction to a firearm may be by mistake because somebody wasn't responsible and secured their firearm out of their nightstand, or it's just put in the back of the closet and kids are curious. So the Eddie Eagle program kind of bridges that gap for homes that don't have firearms in it, because all of our kids have sleepovers at friends' house, or we host them at our own houses, and you can't control what happens in another person's house.
Right.
How responsible are they? Do they have firearms in the house? You're not going to interrogate the parents. Maybe you do.
I might, yeah.
On things like that.
I'll be doing a background check before my kids sleep at anybody else's house.
Yeah. And, and for us, we have a kind of our way of viewing things, and our daughter has had sleepovers at other friends' house, but we know the parents, and we're actually friends with those parents, so there's none of that concern for us. But with the Eddie Eagle program, it's it kind of bridges that gap where you as a parent may not have knowledge or experience. So you're kind of getting educated because kids aren't left there alone. It's not a babysitting course.
Yep.
The parents stay there with the kids, and you go over it. There's a little coloring books, a little cartoon. And basically, this is probably a bad term to use, but you're indoctrinating the kids with a safety mindset.
Yeah.
Of, hey, if you see a gun, don't touch it. Go tell an adult. And let them take control of the situation. And they got a little saying or whatever that is catchy, and the kids remember it and they'll sing it or whatever. But it's a gap in most places I know of that do teach it, which there aren't that many out there. I don't think they ever charge a dime.
Yeah.
A lot of times police departments will have it. Clark County Gun Club or shooting range up here in the northern part of Vegas, I'm sure they have it without knowing. I'll speak confidently on that. Typically, I know I've talked to my Jiu Jitsu coach about having it at our academy because we got a very large kids program there. And it's like, look, I'll order the material. It's not overly expensive. I'll pay for it all out of pocket. If the parents want to do a class, they're at the academy on a Saturday or Sunday morning or something like that, I'll do it as many times as you want.
Yeah.
And I'll always do it for free.
Yeah, because that's back to your responsibility. Like, as responsible gun owners, that's our job, right? To make sure that nobody ever gets injured. And, before I met you, I took the NRA and the government or the state required concealed carry class through a gentleman who's got every instructor qualification under the sun. He teaches the SWAT team out here, one of the sheriff's SWAT team. And so I asked him about this. I'm like, hey, all of our firearms are locked up, and my son is wildly interested in firearms. I haven't taken him shooting yet. He's not at that maturity level yet, and that's like a decision we're trying to make as a family about when it's appropriate. But I told him, I said, God forbid he's ever at his uncle's house or something, or there's a firearm at a friend's house. Like, what's your suggestion? He's like, look, if you've got especially a young boy who's very interested, you're not going to teach him responsibility at 4, 5, 6 years old to create a safe environment. He's like, but you can bribe him.
Yes.
He goes, just tell him that if he ever sees an undetended firearm and he runs and tells the nearest adult, you'll buy him anything you want at the toy store. Yep. So sure enough, because my wife loves Target, had this conversation with my son, and I'm like, Gabe, if you ever see a firearm, it might be safe, it might be unsafe, it might be a toy, it might be an airsoft, we never know. So if you ever see a firearm, you come and run and tell either mom, dad, Uncle Hugo, or Aunt Yesenia, and I will buy you anything you want at Target. And his eyes just lit up, and he's like, what? And so sure enough, we were moving some stuff from one house to another, and I knew that I had a bag with an AR-15 in it, and it had a trigger lock, so nothing could really happen. But we were unloading the garage, and he was helping me reorganize the garage. Like, somehow garages always become a mess. I don't know. That's like the Twilight. Every man's garage is like the Twilight Zone where shit just ends up in there. You got to clean it out a couple times a year. So I told Gabriel, I was like, hey Gabe, can you unload that bag for me? And we're just gonna put the stuff up on the shelves. Just unload the bag. So I kind of step around the corner where he couldn't see me, and he unzipped a bag with an AR-15 in it. I saw his eyes get big as saucers. He comes running, Dad, there's a gun there. There is a gun. And I was like, good job, buddy. I'm like, hey man, I appreciate you being responsible. I played dumb, and I was like, oh, I forgot there was a firearm in there. I'm going to take you to Target to get whatever you want. And he was like so proud of himself that he had done the right thing. Yes. And then he got the positive reinforcement of buying some $60 Akato fighting soldier or something. I don't know what the hell it was, but it's like, if I can teach him that for $60, that's like the most valuable lesson ever. I was scared he was going to go to like one of the power vehicles and make me buy him like a $300 little battery operated Humvee. Yeah. I was like, oh man, I'm going to get stuck with a $300 electric Humvee, but all he wanted was these little fighting figures, so I got off easy. What did I forget to ask you about running, Chapman Tactical and what you're building there? What question did I forget to ask you about either firearms training or maybe some suggestions for those people that did buy a firearm for the first time, put it in a box, hopefully a lock box, put it under the bed and haven't shot it yet? What are the things I forgot to ask you about your business? There's
not a whole lot to it. It's pretty simple. It's, lay the foundations. Let's get rid of the ignorance. Let's educate. I tried to make it as affordable as possible. I'm not in this game to get rich. Obviously, got expenses that I got to cover.
Right.
But yeah, just get the education. Get a little bit of experience. For guys, it's always our ego that's in the way. And I know tons and tons of people who just go buy a gun. I've seen, Rambo.
Right.
I know how to do this.
Yeah, no, you don't.
And they don't know what they don't know. And much like one of the most important lessons that Jiu Jitsu teaches you is that, if you're not winning, you're learning. Because we don't want to fail with something that can have dire results if we're not responsible with it. So it's okay to get tapped out.
Yeah.
It's okay to go and get some education and training. Don't be afraid of knowledge.
Yeah.
Don't let your ego get in the way, because this is something that, I mean, I guess dipping into the political realm of it some, is that if we don't exercise responsibility with our rights, then it gives justification to remove those rights.
Yep.
So if we're not a responsible society with how we handle our firearms, and we're not trying to be responsible, then can you blame any political group or entity for wanting to take that away from you?
Not at all.
If you're not responsible with how you're driving, they remove your license and your ability, which, I mean, it's a privilege to drive, but more so it's almost a right, because you got to go to work nowadays.
Right.
But, you know, you lose that. And if we're not responsible, I mean, in time we will lose this. And to a certain degree, it will be justified.
Yeah.
So get some education. Be responsible. Act maturely. I mean, there's a lot of fun YouTube videos out there. And I've even shot a couple of them where we've tested out some of the additional things that I sell through my business, between body armor and ballistic helmets. But we're not going out there and like, okay, I'm putting it on, and like,
Right.
and the jackal is like, don't shoot me in the face, just shoot the helmet. We're not doing anything like that. We're being responsible, and we're genuinely trying, you know, for not being scientists or experts in that. We're going out and we're kind of field testing it, and we'll shoot these objects and see how well they hold up, and be like, oh, okay. But at no point in time are we going out there trying to be cool about it. You know, maybe we're cracking jokes. But it's one of those things that it's okay, guys.
Yeah.
It's all right to go take a little bit of your time if you're serious about being a firearm owner, if you're serious about your personal protection and that of your family. Just because you think you know is probably one of the more dangerous things. You're probably going to end up blowing your toe off or something like that, or causing more harm than good. So it's okay to go get some education and get some practice from people who are better at it than you. If they're doing it right, they're trying to get you to their level, just like with the aspect of kind of bringing airmen along in the Air Force. We're way better off if we can educate others who are less knowledgeable than us. And there's expensive classes out there, and then there's affordable classes. Do what you can do. You know, most everybody in America knows somebody that's at least responsible with safety portions of firearms. They may not be a marksman or anything like that, but if all you got time and money for is to go hang out with Bill or something like that, the guy that hangs out down there at the gun shop BSing all the time, then, you know, then that's what you got.
Yeah, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, you know, Teddy Roosevelt, do what you can with what you have where you're at.
Love it.
And just do something.
So we're surprisingly a little ahead of schedule. We try to release one a week. So this will probably drop beginning of 2023, and hopefully between now, you know, November and the beginning of 2023, hopefully there's nothing crazy that happens with firearms that we should have talked about before this got released, or we'll have you back on for another podcast. But going into 2023, other than retiring from the Air Force, what are you most excited about, or what are you looking forward to in 2023?
What I'm looking forward to, and to back up my beliefs that I per se preach. My very first basic pistol class of January will be absolutely free.
Nice.
I'll have to limit it to my normal class size of 10. So when I get that on the calendar, when I promote it on my Instagram and Facebook, things like that, that very first basic pistol class of 2023 is going to be free for the first 10 people who sign up. And I cap my classes at 10. Because I don't, like I said, it's okay if I don't get rich doing this.
Right.
If I stick to my reason for why, then I can provide quality training for that many people, safe training, and that way nobody feels gypped like it's a 40 or 50 person class.
Right.
You know, I can give personal attention and help folks truly grow in this experience, in this journey. So for the first class of January 2023, I'll be putting it out there. It'll be absolutely free.
Well, I'll make sure that this podcast drops before that first class fills up, and I'd love to come out and just assist you, kind of see how you do things.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe be a second set of eyes. So keep me in mind. Just let's put that on the calendar, unless it's the 12th or the 13th, which I think is a Thursday, Friday, where I'm already committed in January. But other than that, I'll make it out with you to be your second set of eyes. And then last question, which is one of my favorite questions to ask. I keep saying I'm going to ask this to begin the podcast because I feel like I can learn so much about somebody. Favorite movie and why?
Favorite movie. While I am a huge horror movie fan.
Oh, interesting.
My favorite movie is Forrest Gump.
Why?
I mean, how is it not everybody's? I mean, seriously. Everything about it. I mean, there's a lot of historical facts to it, obviously elaborated.
Right.
For the sake of Hollywood. But that has to be, hands down, from beginning to end, probably the most entertaining movie I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And I watch it at least once a year. And when it came out, I was in high school. So some of my most influential time of my life of being a young man at the time had a lot of influences. Like, man, look at this dude. He's just running everywhere.
Is it because you guys have the same twang in your voice? You're
maybe.
Yeah.
I'll go on and venture out and say Tom Hanks is fake with his, but he done a great job, and you can't argue his greatness in acting also.
Yeah, he was epic in that movie. And, I made the mistake because I also love that movie, and the soundtrack is epic.
Oh,
I mean, everything about that movie is great. Except for I watched some YouTube, the angry movie review or whatever, talk about what a horrible human being Jenny is through that entire movie. And now it's ruined it for me because now I watch that movie and I'm just pissed at Jenny. I'm like, you bitch, you ruined this poor guy's life. And it's like, it's so sad. But yeah, an epic movie, man. And I want to have you back in 2023 once you get out and you're doing full time in the tactical training world. So we'll definitely have you back later on in the year.
Oh man, I greatly appreciate it. And it's an honor to always be invited onto a podcast or something like this. So I greatly appreciate you carving out the time and having me out.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Cool. Have a good one.